There is a bird that lays no eggs and has no young. It was here when the world began and is still living today in a hidden, faraway land. Hello everybody, I'm Miss Lexi and I work for the Harris County Public Library, and what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be taking a look at a constellation called the Phoenix. So a little bit about what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the actual constellation, what it's made up of, and a little bit of the physical or the nitty-gritty history of it. And then we're actually going to dive into the mythos of the constellation and see what we can see and how it came to be what we know it today as. So the constellation we're going to go ahead and take a look at today is called the Phoenix constellation. It's one of my favorites, even though I never really get to see it too much. This constellation is, see it too much. I mean, I don't get to see it at all, which makes me very sad. So this constellation is actually in the southern hemisphere. So pretty much everybody in North America and along that line of similarity do not get to see this constellation. It is actually only visible in, Australia and South Africa is where it's most easily seen, and that's usually just during the summer. But unfortunately, it can't really be observed by anyone living in the north side. So this Phoenix cluster is, as you can see over here on the side of the screen, I have the actual constellation and how it's mapped up in our night sky. So if you ever buy one of those starry maps or things like that and you're just looking at all these dots and lines, if you look towards the southern side of it, you'll see the Phoenix constellation. It is a minor constellation, so basically what that means is it's not really a large constellation and it's not really easily visible either. And so it's still, like, the mythology behind the Phoenix, though, is what makes this one of my favorites. And as you can see, I actually have an image from the Hubble Space Imaging Center, and you can actually find these people online for free, and you can look at all the pretty little stars in our night sky. And this is an actual close-up image of the Phoenix constellation and galaxy. So funny enough, though, while it is only a minor constellation, the Phoenix cluster is one of the most massive galaxy clusters known. And as they like to say, it is showing star-forming activity at the highest rate ever recorded in a galaxy cluster. So basically what that means is this Phoenix cluster is actually producing more stars than anyone's ever really seen before or across any of the other galaxies. And it still kind of holds that record as far as I know for today. And so I find that funny because it's like this itty bitty thing that, like, everybody is deemed like a minor constellation is actually one of the things that is producing the most stars in our galaxy. It's just funny. So it is a massive cluster. It also, this part's kind of weird, but there is a supermassive black hole at the core of the system that grows very rapidly, and it's expanding at a rate about 60 solar masses per year. I'm not exactly sure what that last part means, but that's a little bit scary in terms of the fact that it's a black hole and growing rapidly. But so something that's producing all of these stars and popping them out at the center of it is a black hole into only God knows where. So it almost seems like an oxymoron to me a little bit. Now, I don't really have a background in astronomy or any of that. I'm just kind of going off of self-learned stuff that I've used free resources online to kind of learn about and brush up on. So if you guys dig into it, you guys can find probably more too. So this Phoenix cluster, it's also, sorry, not the cluster, the actual constellation itself is known to be part of the four birds of paradise. And these are the southern bird constellations. There's the Phoenix, a Grus, a Peyo, and a Toucan. I always laugh at that last one because when I think toucan, I think the little guy on the Fruit Loops box. So it's just kind of funny. But those are kind of all part of that same cluster, and they were all named by the same guy, Jonah Bayer, B-A-Y-E-R, in 1603. The dates may vary a little bit, but it's pretty much all by the same guy. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the Phoenix constellation. Oh, there's one more thing. There is a meteor shower that is associated with the constellation, which occurs around December 5th every year. So basically what this means is you'll typically see a lot of shooting stars and things like that coming from this Phoenix constellation. Well, coming from, basically it's kind of like the center point of where you're seeing it originate from. But yeah, so I guess we'll go ahead and dive into a little bit of the mythos behind it. So I'm sure most people have probably heard of a phoenix before, if not to some degree, or just in passing. To me, it's kind of funny that one of the really well-known mythological creatures, especially now because of Harry Potter, has kind of, like, the actual mythos behind the phoenix has kind of gone a little bit underground, which is odd to me because I have spent a good number of hours searching for maybe like an original text or an original mythos from it, and I cannot seem to pinpoint one. The closest thing I get is to a generic one in which it talks about its life and death and all of that jazz, but like not an actual mythological story behind the phoenix. So, a little bit about the mythos for the phoenix is it's one of the most widely immersive stories. So a lot of the mythology behind it, you see it in Greek, Persian, Arabic, Egyptian, Roman, Turkish, Indian, Chinese, and this isn't even a full list. And they assume like a lot of the original mythos is kind of credited to the Greeks, but there are many people and scholars who will pretty much debate on that, about whether or not it should be going to the Egyptians, because in Egyptian depictings there is a story around a bird that kind of carries similar features and attributes. It's basically a favored bird of Ra, the god of the sun in Egyptian mythology. So it's just a little bit interesting to see, like, before these cultures and places even had a way of communicating with each other, and some of them were never even really exposed to each other, yet somehow this legend of a bird who is basically immortal has kind of spanned through times, and not only time but also cultures and places that were pretty much physically isolated from one another for the times that they were in. But it's just, that's one of the things where you don't really see this type of thing happen very often with mythologies, especially with mythos of creatures. You'll kind of see some similarities between certain creatures throughout mythos, but there's none that have been like a definitive yes, this is the same creature because it has the same characteristics, it has the same features, it's associated with the same things, and it's just really kind of cool when you think about it, that something like that could actually span across so much. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what the phoenix actually symbolizes as well. Because again, in a lot of these cultures and a lot of these areas that the mythos has come from or has been a part of, like, how is there a way for them to really communicate? So a little bit of the symbology you'll see behind the phoenix is, of course, rebirth, rejuvenation, healing, prosperity, things like that nature. You'll also see it associated with, in a lot of mythos, there were pantheons of gods and goddesses. Typically, you'll see the phoenix associated with the sun god or goddess. But yeah, that's kind of cool. And so this phoenix, it is also interesting as part of the Chinese lore. So a little bit about the Chinese lore behind it is it's usually not seen alone in the Chinese lore. Whereas like with a lot of other different, actually there's one other, I stand corrected. Chinese and the Native American lore are pretty much the only two cultures that have kind of showed the phoenix in pair with somebody other than their god or goddess that they're going to be favored by, basically. And so with this assimilation, like with the Chinese lore, with a lot of their mythos actually, it comes in hand to a lot about balance. So you'll see the phoenix is typically paired with a dragon. A phoenix typically symbolizing the more nurturing and calmer side of things, while the dragon depicting the opposite. And so you will actually see, and again, in a Native American lore, there is one very, very vague story in which the phoenix is paired with a turtle, oddly enough. And in Native American lore, it actually goes by the name of the Thunderbird. So that's a little bit different too. And so another thing is about this bird is, again, and throughout all of these mythos and everything, you find that everybody kind of gives this bird the same origin. You'll see it in, like, when you're talking about Jewish text or biblical mythos, things like that. You'll see they call it a bird of paradise because typically it'll come from the Garden of Eden, the beginning of time, the gods or goddesses' gardens, Mount Olympus, things like that. Like, the home of the bird is actually said to be in that realm. Basically, it all represents kind of the beginning of time is where that bird's from. And so another thing about the phoenix, this one is actually different across mythologies, is, of course, the bird dies and then it's reborn. But the method of death is different depending upon which mythos you're talking about. In some of the more, I guess, exuberant mythologies, the ones that are a bit more flourish with how they describe things or how they descript their stories, you'll find that the phoenix is typically resembled to burst into flames and ashes, kind of like in the Harry Potter film. And from those ashes, you have a new phoenix reborn. but in another version of it, it's also depicted as the phoenix going through the actual stages of death, like fully decomposing, and then an egg forming out of the skeleton of the bird, and then the bird is then reborn again. I find it interesting because since the bird is technically immortal, it never dies during that process. Even though it goes through the stages of death, it's never said to actually die. Another thing that varies is the age of the phoenix throughout mythologies. So a lot of them say 500 years, others will say 700, and then other ones will say a really odd number. I think it was like 1,473 years or something like that. It was just this really, really oddly precise number. It kind of makes me wonder where they came up with it. But so they say that this bird lives anywhere from 500 to 400 or 1,400 years. And so this bird lives this long, but it's actually the only one of its kind. So, of course, I guess in the mythologies it makes the most sense if something's immortal that it be the only one of its kind, because if it were to reproduce, then you would have several things being immortal. I don't know if the creators really thought that far ahead or that much into it, but to me it's kind of interesting because it's like, yes, you have this immortal being. Like, even in mythologies from Greek and Chinese, when they talk about their gods and goddesses, like, even they can apparently be killed or chained or captured. But this phoenix is really the only thing that's kind of immortal and living and free, completely free. It's said to travel the world and bring prosperity and good luck. That's the most common one, is the prosperity. You'll see that mostly kind of in similarity with Chinese lore, if I believe, about the phoenix. And so it's just one of those things. It's really, I'm kind of petering off here. So anyways, the death is to symbolize the rebirth, but it's one of those things. It's different across all mythos as well as its age, but it has a lot of similarities. I have yet to really find a concrete story of the phoenix, so if you guys have one, feel free to post one below in the comments and let me know, because I've been digging for one. But yeah, that was pretty much all I had on the phoenix today. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit about the mythos and the constellations of the stars and kind of where they came from. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you had a great time. Bye-bye.